The sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked sidewalk of Eastwood Avenue. Cars rumbled past without slowing, their windows rolled up, drivers barely sparing a glance at the small figure standing beside the faded yellow stand. Kiara adjusted the crooked cardboard sign for the third time that morning. Fresh lemonade, 50C. Her hands, sticky with sweat and lemon juice, trembled slightly as she straightened the stack of paper cups. A gust of hot wind rattled the flimsy table, almost knocking it over. Across the street, a group of teenagers lounged near the gas station, laughing too loudly. One of them pointed at Kiara, nudging his friends. Their mocking laughter floated across the street, sharper than the summer air. "Look at her," one of them sneered. "Trying to get rich selling lemonade? Dream on, kid." Kiara heard every word. Her cheeks flushed, but she kept her head high. She had learned early that if you flinched, if you showed even a flicker of doubt, they would only laugh harder. So she gripped the table's edge tighter and smiled at the next passing stranger, even though her throat felt tight. Hours crawled by. Only two people stopped. A mother with a restless toddler, and an old man who gave her a wink and an extra quarter. The rest? They glanced, smirked, and kept walking, as if her little stand was invisible, or worse, ridiculous. But Kiara didn't move. She stayed rooted to that spot, under the boiling sun, with the smell of hot asphalt and the distant clatter of city life around her. Because deep down, she wasn't just selling lemonade. She was selling something else too. A stubborn, invisible kind of hope. And maybe that's something you either understand or you don't. What about you? Would you have stopped to support her? As the sun dipped lower, painting the cracked concrete in long shadows, Kiara wiped her forehead and poured another glass. She had no idea that one day the whole city would know her name. But that day, all she knew was this: you don't build dreams in silence. You build them in laughter, in humiliation, and in all the tiny moments no one else notices. By the time Kiara packed up her stand that evening, her sneakers were soaked from the puddles left by spilled lemonade. Her fingers, pruned and sticky, struggled to count the handful of coins she'd earned, barely enough for a sandwich. She wrapped the dented metal pitcher in a worn dish towel and slung the fold-up table under one arm. The walk home was always the hardest part, not because of the weight she carried, but because of the way people still looked at her, pitying, dismissive, or worse, not at all. Her house sat at the end of a broken sidewalk, its chipped blue paint peeling under the weight of another hot summer. In the front yard, her mother, Denise, was sitting on the porch steps, shelling peas into a cracked ceramic bowl. Kiara hesitated at the gate, her throat tight. What was she supposed to say? That she'd made $4.25 today? That the whole thing felt pointless? But before she could open her mouth, Denise looked up and smiled. A real smile, tired but proud. "Did you keep smiling?" she asked softly, her hands never pausing their steady rhythm. Kiara nodded, and somehow that was enough. Later that night, sitting at the scarred kitchen table, Kiara spread out her coins into neat little piles. Her mother leaned over and placed a weathered dollar bill beside them. "For tomorrow," she said, as if it were a pact. Kiara didn't have the heart to tell her how many people had laughed. Instead, she tucked the dollar into the small tin box she kept under her bed, next to a crumpled notebook filled with doodles of lemonade stands that looked more like castles. Some dreams were too fragile to speak out loud, so Kiara just hugged the box to her chest that night and stared at the ceiling, the soft buzz of the broken fan stirring the heavy summer air. The next morning, Kiara was back on the sidewalk before most of the neighborhood had even woken up. The early sun hit the concrete like a hammer, but she didn't flinch. She had her table, her pitcher, and a stack of fresh hope in the form of homemade lemonade. Across the street, the same teenagers lounged in the shade, sipping sodas and tossing candy wrappers onto the sidewalk. They spotted her immediately, like vultures sensing something fragile. One of the boys, tall and wiry, cupped his hands around his mouth. "Hey, lemonade girl, still think you're gonna be rich?" The others laughed. Kiara's stomach twisted, but she kept her face calm, her movement steady. She poured a cup of lemonade, lined it carefully at the edge of the table, and waved as if their jeering meant nothing. And somewhere inside her, it really didn't. Not today. A few minutes later, a woman pushing a stroller stopped. Her face was flushed from the heat, and she hesitated just long enough for Kiara to flash her brightest smile. "Only 50 cents, Kiara said, holding out a cup like an offering. The woman smiled back, fished some coins from her purse and handed them over. The toddler clapped his sticky hands, giggling as he grabbed the cup. That was all it took. One small victory. One reminder that not everyone was there to tear her down. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can feel like a revolution. What do you think? Can one small moment change a whole day? The sun climbed higher, the asphalt shimmered, and Kiara stayed, pouring, smiling, believing. Not because the world gave her a reason to, but because she decided she didn't need one. By noon, the sidewalk was a furnace. Kiara's t-shirt clung to her back, and her pitcher was down to its last few inches of lemonade. She wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, her legs aching from standing so long. Across the street, the boys were still there, their voices loud, careless. She could feel their eyes on her even when she wasn't looking. Each time they laughed, it prickled along her skin, not because she cared what they thought, but because it reminded her how easy it was to become invisible when you were trying so hard to be seen. A silver SUV pulled into the gas station, polished and humming. The door swung open and a woman stepped out. Sharp, elegant, the kind of person Kiara imagined worked in offices with floors you could see your reflection in. The woman noticed the lemonade stand as she adjusted her sunglasses. Kiara straightened, heart hammering. This was her chance. She grabbed her last clean cup, wiped it on her jeans, and held it out. The woman glanced over once, gave a tight, polite smile, and turned away, walking straight into the gas station. Kiara's hand hung in the air for a second longer than it should have before she lowered it slowly. The laughter across the street got louder. She closed her eyes, just for a second. It wasn't the heat that made her eyes sting. Not really. When she opened them again, she forced herself to smile. Because that's what her mom had taught her. You smile, even when it feels like everything inside you is crumbling. Especially then. Because maybe someone would notice. Maybe someone would care. And if no one did, you kept standing anyway. Kept. The bell over the gas station door jingled. Kiara didn't look up this time. She just poured herself a small cup of lemonade, leaned against her rickety table, and took a sip. It was warm, slightly too sour, but she drank it anyway. The afternoon dragged on, each hour stretching Kiara thinner and thinner. The sun painted the pavement in waves of heat that blurred the edges of everything. Buildings, cars, even the faces of people who walked past without stopping. Kiara counted the cracks in the sidewalk to distract herself. 112 if she started from the corner by the gas station and ended at the light pole 2 blocks down. It was something to hold on to. At some point, an old man in a faded baseball cap shuffled by with a plastic grocery bag swinging from his wrist. He gave her a small nod, the kind of nod that said, "I see you," even if he didn't say anything at all. It was more kindness than she'd gotten all day. When Kiara looked into her pitcher again, it was nearly empty. She stared at the last inch of lemonade swirling at the bottom, feeling the ache deep in her chest, not from thirst or the heat, but from the heavy silence that had followed her all day. No matter how bright she smiled, no matter how straight she stood. Because the dream, however foolish it seemed, didn't go away just because no one else could see it. As Kiara slung the table under her arm and picked up her half-empty pitcher, she paused. The laughter from across the street had died down. The boys were gone. Only the empty candy wrappers remained, spinning in lazy circles on the hot pavement. For the first time all day, the sidewalk belonged to her alone. Kiara smiled to herself, not because she had sold out her lemonade, not because she had made money, but because she had stayed. And sometimes, that was enough. Kiara's footsteps echoed against the cracked sidewalks, each step heavier than the last. The coins in her bag clinked together softly, a small, hollow sound that somehow made the silence around her feel even louder. When she turned the corner to her block, the last rays of the sun spilled across the chipped blue walls of her apartment building. There, sitting on the front stoop like always, was her mother, Denise, shelling peas into a cracked ceramic bowl. Same bowl, same strong, tired hands, same patient stillness, like the world outside their little orbit couldn't touch her. Kiara climbed the steps slowly, her bag sagging against her side. She dropped it with a soft thud and sat down beside her mother. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the soft pop of peas dropping into the bowl filled the air, steady, rhythmic, almost comforting. "Was it any better today?" Denise finally asked, her voice low and careful, like she was asking if a wound still hurt. Kiara stared at her scraped sneakers. The words got stuck in her throat for a second before slipping out. "No one really came," she muttered. "They just laughed again." Denise didn't flinch. She didn't rush to soothe or argue. She just nodded once, rolling a pea between her fingers thoughtfully. "And you stayed," she said simply. Not a question, a fact. Kiara blinked, the burning behind her eyes stronger now. She hadn't realized how much she needed someone to notice that part. Not the failure, not the loneliness, the staying. Her mother smiled, a slow, proud thing that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "Most people quit long before it gets good," Denise said, voice like a secret passed between generations. "But not you. You keep standing." Kiara didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she leaned her head lightly against her mother's shoulder, letting the silence fill the spaces where words would have only gotten in the way. Above them, the first streetlights flickered to life, humming quietly in the deepening dusk. And for the first time all day, Kiara didn't feel small. She felt rooted. The next morning, Kiara woke up before the sun even touched the windows. The city was still wrapped in that soft blue silence, the kind that made every sound, the creak of the bed, the rustle of clothes, feel sacred. She packed her stand again, this time with a few new ideas tucked under her sleeve. Her mom had helped her mix the lemonade, sweeter, with a twist of strawberry Kiara had thought up on her own. Maybe today wouldn't be different, but maybe, just maybe. She tugged her baseball cap low over her forehead, stuffed a handful of change into her pocket, and stepped into the cool morning air. The streets looked different before the city woke up. Kinder, almost, as if they were waiting too. Kiara picked a new spot this time, a little closer to the farmer's market where more people passed by. She set up her stand carefully, her table a little more stable now, her sign a little brighter. The new lemonade glowed pink in the sunlight. For a moment she just stood there, taking it in, owning it. And deep inside she felt it, a stubborn little ember that hadn't gone out after all. Not invisible, not today. If you ever started something and felt like nobody cared, would you keep going anyway? Kiara straightened her back, lifted her chin. The first customers hadn't even arrived yet, but she was ready, really ready. The minutes ticked by, slow and syrupy like the summer heat that was already beginning to rise off the asphalt. Kiara stood behind her table, her hands neatly folded in front of her, her heart thudding a little louder with every passing stranger. Some glanced over, most didn't. A woman pushing a stroller caught her eye, hesitated for half a heartbeat, but then hurried past when the baby began to fuss. Kiara forced a smile anyway, her cheeks beginning to ache under the weight of it. Stay patient, stay kind, stay standing. She whispered the words like a prayer inside her mind, the same way her mother used to before a hard day at work. And then, finally, a shift. An elderly man with a wide-brimmed hat and thick glasses ambled over. He leaned heavily on a worn cane, squinting at her sign. "Lemonade, huh?" he grunted, voice rough like gravel. "Strawberry too?" Kiara nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "Best in the city," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. The man chuckled, pulling out a crumpled dollar bill from his shirt pocket. "I'll be the judge of that." Kiara poured carefully, hands shaking just a little, and handed over the cup with both palms, the way her mom had taught her. Always with respect, no matter who it was. The man took a slow sip. Paused. Then broke into a smile so wide it seemed to take 10 years off his face. "Best damn lemonade I've had in a long time," he said, nodding approvingly. "You keep this up, young lady." He slipped a $5 bill onto her table, far more than the price, and shuffled away without waiting for change. Kiara stared at the money, stunned. It wasn't just the cash. It was the validation, the tiny spark of proof that maybe, just maybe, her dream wasn't foolish after all. Her heart soared, her lungs filling with air that tasted different, cleaner, freer. As the morning wore on, more people trickled by. Some bought out of curiosity, some bought out of kindness. But they bought. Little by little, her pitcher grew lighter, her cup heavier with coins. By noon, Kiara had sold out every last drop. She sat on the curb afterward, legs stretched out, sweat trickling down her temples, smiling at nothing in particular. Today wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was enough. And somehow, that made it everything. The next weekend, Kiara was back at it. This time, earlier. This time with 2 pitchers instead of 1. Word had started to spread, not in big ways, not yet, but enough that when she set up her stand, she caught curious glances from people she didn't recognize. Some smiled knowingly as if they were rooting for her now. Some just looked curious, but it was better than indifference. And when the first few customers trickled in, an older couple walking their dog, a jogger wiping sweat from his brow, Kiara knew she had crossed an invisible line. She wasn't just the girl standing there anymore. She was becoming the girl with the lemonade. The late morning, as the sun climbed higher and the air grew heavy with humidity, a woman in a crisp blue blouse and high heels stopped at Kiara's stand. Kiara noticed immediately. The woman didn't look like most people from their neighborhood. There was something polished about her, sharp edges, purpose. The woman took a long look at Kiara's handmade sign, the mismatched cups, the way Kiara straightened her posture despite the tiredness around her eyes. "How much for a cup?" she asked, her voice brisk, but not unkind. Kiara quoted the price, trying not to sound nervous. The woman handed over a bill, too large, and waved away the change. As she sipped the lemonade, her eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. "This is actually really good," she said. Kiara smiled, her pride quiet but fierce. The woman hesitated, studying her. "You ever thought about setting up at the community market?" she asked. "They run a program for young entrepreneurs on Saturdays. Might be good exposure." Kiara's heart skipped. The words felt surreal, almost like a language she wasn't used to hearing spoken to her. Opportunity, respect, belief. She nodded slowly, unsure if her voice would even work if she tried to speak. The woman pulled a sleek business card from her purse and slid it across the table. "Think about it," she said, "and if you're serious, call me." Then, without waiting for a reply, she walked away, heels clicking sharply against the sidewalk. Kiara stared at the card for a long time, felt its weight settle into her palm like a key to something she had only ever dreamed about. Maybe today wasn't just about lemonade anymore. Maybe it was about something bigger. Much bigger. Kiara stared at the card for what felt like forever. Community Market Program, Youth Entrepreneurs Initiative. Such a small thing, yet it carried the weight of everything she had ever dared to dream. But then, the doubts crept in. Quiet at first, like whispers threading through her mind. "You're just a kid with a folding table and some scribbled signs. What are you thinking?" That night, she lay in bed, the card perched on the cracked nightstand beside her. Her fingers absently traced its edges over and over again, like she could somehow absorb its meaning if she just held it long enough. But no matter how many times she touched it, the fears stayed. There was the registration fee, There were permits she didn't even fully understand. There were costs for supplies, tables, banners, things she didn't even know she needed yet. Kiara had the spirit, but not the funds. Her whole empire so far had been built on a $5 bag of lemons and borrowed hope. She closed her eyes tightly, fighting the feeling that maybe this, like so many things in her life, wasn't meant for someone like her. Yet somewhere inside, buried beneath the doubt, a different voice rose, steadier, older. The voice that had carried her through every hard day before this. You don't need everything figured out today. You just need to take one more step. As the first faint hum of morning buses echoed down the street, Kiara made her decision. She wasn't going to walk away from this, not because it was hard, and definitely not because she was scared. She was going to fight for it, even if it meant standing all alone, because maybe the real difference between a dream and a reality was simply the courage to believe one more time when everyone else had already stopped. The next morning, Kiara moved differently. She wasn't sure if it was bravery or just stubbornness, but either way, it fueled her. Before school, she scraped together every coin she could find, from under the couch cushions, from the bottom of her backpack, even from the old coffee jar her mother kept loose change in. She counted and recounted the little pile, willing it to grow somehow. It wasn't enough, not yet. But Kiara refused to let the numbers defeat her. After school, while her classmates poured into fast food spots or slouched into buses, Kiara had a different plan. She walked into every single business on her street, corner stores, beauty salons, small restaurants with cracked tiles and worn menus. Everywhere she went, she introduced herself, shy at first, then a little stronger each time, and told them about the community market, told them she wanted to represent the neighborhood, told them she needed help. Some brushed her off with distracted smiles, some listened politely, nodded, and gave her nothing. But some saw something in her. A few dollars here, a handful of coins there. One woman, an elderly florist with calloused hands and kind eyes, handed her a crumpled $20 bill. "For the dream," she said simply. By sunset, Kiara sat on the front steps of her building, counting her little collection of cash under the golden light. It still wasn't enough. But it was close. Closer than she had been that morning. And maybe that was the real victory. She realized then, no one was going to hand her success. She had to build it from scraps, from stubbornness, from faith in a world that rarely gave her reasons to believe. The next day, she repeated the process. And the next, some people started to recognize her. The little girl with the fierce eyes and the worn-out sneakers, chasing something bigger than the block they all lived on. By the end of the week, Kiara had the fee for the market, and a little extra. Not much, not enough to be reckless, but enough to buy a proper sign, enough to make her little stand look just a little more real. Enough to stand up and say, "I'm here, and I'm not going away." The morning of the community market arrived with a nervous buzz that Kiara could feel deep in her bones. The sky was still pale and bruised with the early colors of dawn as she packed up her supplies. 2 pitchers of lemonade, 1 homemade cloth sign stitched by her mother the night before, and a heart so full of hope it could barely be contained. Her mother stood at the door, arms crossed, pretending not to worry. "You sure you got everything, baby?" Kiara smiled, a real, wide smile, and nodded. "I got enough." The market was already alive when she arrived. Rows of colorful booths lined the blocked-off street, each one manned by people twice, sometimes 3 times her age. Farmers with bushels of vegetables, artisans with handmade jewelry, families selling baked goods stacked high in shiny glass cases. For a second, Kiara hesitated at the edge of it all. She was small, she was alone, and she was carrying nothing but 2 pitchers and a dream. But then she spotted a tiny, empty spot near the end of the row, sandwiched between a booth selling hand-painted vases and another covered in knitted scarves. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She unfolded her little table, wiped it down with the corner of her jacket, set out the lemonade pitchers, and pinned her cloth sign to the front. Lemon spark. Fresh. Honest. Made with heart. People walked by, some glancing her way, most not. A few smiled kindly, but no one stopped. At least not yet. Kiara refused to be discouraged. She stood tall behind her tiny stand, calling out with a voice she barely recognized as her own. Fresh lemonade, only $1. Hand-squeezed, homemade, and full of sunshine. Still the crowd streamed past, drawn to the bigger, flashier setups. An hour ticked by. Her shoulders sagged. Doubt crept back in, whispering cruel things. You're just a kid. No one is going to take you seriously. But just as she was about to retreat into herself, a little boy with wild curls and a gap-toothed grin tugged at his mother's hand. Mommy, can I have some? The woman, weary and distracted, glanced at Kiara, really looked at her, and something softened in her face. Sure, sweetie. Kiara fumbled to pour the lemonade, her hands trembling slightly, but she handed it over with a smile so bright it could have lit the whole block. The boy sipped, smacked his lips dramatically, and declared loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. This is the best lemonade ever! Laughter rippled through the crowd, heads turned, and just like that, the dam broke. More people drifted over, drawn by the boy's endorsement, by Kiara's earnest smile, by the undeniable pull of something real in a sea of polished perfection. By noon, her pitchers were nearly empty. By 1 o'clock, she had sold out completely. Standing behind her bare table, Kiara blinked against the sting of tears, not because she was sad, but because she realized she had done it. Not through luck, not through charity, through grit, through courage, through showing up when it would have been easier to walk away. And maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. Kiara packed up her little table slowly, almost reluctantly. The late afternoon sun bathed the market in a warm, golden haze, and everything around her seemed softer, more dreamlike. Vendors shouted their last deals. Children ran past with sticky hands and balloon strings tangled in their fingers. The world felt, for once, perfectly in motion, and she was a part of it. She tucked the empty pitchers into her backpack, folded the cloth sign with tender care, and slung it over her shoulder like it was some sacred flag. As she made her way through the market, she caught snippets of conversations. Did you try that lemonade? That little girl? Best thing here? Hands down. Kiara smiled without meaning to. Outside the market, she waited at the corner for the bus, the same old cracked sidewalk, the same rusted bench with peeling paint. But somehow, everything was different. The bus hissed to a stop and she climbed aboard, dropping her few crumpled bills into the fare box. She made her way to a window seat and sank down with a long breath, letting herself finally feel the weight of the day and the weight she had shed. Her phone buzzed once. A text from her mother. Proud of you, baby. No elaborate speeches, no long paragraphs, just those simple, heavy words that filled every empty space in her heart. Kiara leaned her forehead against the glass, watching the city blur past. And for the first time in a long, long time, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She felt unstoppable. Because today she hadn't just sold lemonade. She hadn't just made a few dollars. She had taken her first real step toward something bigger, something nobody could ever take from her. A future she had built with her own 2 hands. A future she believed in. The bus rumbled down the street, and somewhere deep in her chest, Kiara promised herself this was only the beginning. The real dream wasn't to sell lemonade forever. It was to build something that would outgrow the sidewalk, the market, even the neighborhood. A brand, a legacy, a story that would inspire every little kid standing on cracked pavement wondering if they mattered. And she knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be harder days ahead, bigger obstacles, sharper failures. But now she had tasted victory. Now she knew what it felt like to stand in the storm and not be washed away. As the bus turned toward her street, Kiara closed her eyes for a moment and whispered to herself, "You're just getting started." What about you? Have you ever been underestimated and proved everyone wrong? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if you believe dreams are built one small step at a time, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more inspiring journeys.